Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a return listener, welcome home. Today, I am joined by a really heart-centered, impactful man in Matt Gottesman, and we recently just got connected through a mutual friend, Brandon Collinsworth, who you all know very well. Brandon's been on the podcast probably 4 or 5 times now, and having connected with Matt, I really have enjoyed the way his mind works and how creative and innovative and expansive his thinking is. And so I was just on his podcast. I was like, you got to come on mine. And so I'm going to give you a little backstory on who he is, and then we're going to jump right into the meat of today. So thank you for being here. Matt is a 2-time founder, writer, and podcaster. He's also a digital marketer and strategist by trade, with a background in helping some of the world's most iconic brands. About a decade ago, he made a choice to rewire some of the narratives that were in his mind that felt restrictive, and really wanted to marry these very complex topics into who he was and what he did. And he loves business, spirituality, and exploring personal development and human optimization, because he believes all of these help us become better people, creating more intentional impact in the world. That's what he embodies. He runs Permissionless, a weekly mail drop on Substack. He also has a Forbes featured top 1% podcast called The Hustle Sold Separately, and his personal podcast, The Niche Is You, which we're going to be talking about today, just that concept alone. In short, he felt that choosing a niche can feel like life or death, and until you realize the niche is you, you're not really living life on your terms. So you are the most powerful and creative operating system, so your purpose actually has direction. Matt, thank you for being here, brother. I'm excited to connect with you and dive deep on so many topics today. But I'm glad you're here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, we definitely have already explored a lot of topics, so we we really knew that we could go in a lot of different directions, and
Absolutely.
so I'm all yours, and thank you for having me with your audience.
Yes. So you know, in your bio, it says 10 years ago you had this moment where you're like, things have got to change. The story in my mind is not supporting who I want to be, where I want to go, what I want my life to be about. Can you just take us back to that moment? What was going on, and what led to the decision that placed you here?
It was a very spiritual one, and a very real one. I think what was happening is so I've been in digital my whole life, and I've always worked for myself, and I seemingly was creating a life that I thought that was going well, until I realized that it wasn't what I thought it was, which is the usual thing you hear from, I think, from a lot of people. Did I love what I do? Yes. But I was around some of the companies and brands that I was around, not previously. I was working with like Louis Vuitton, Moët Hennessy. They were actually very humble brands. They taught me so much about life and business. But then I was with some other brands at that time, and I was doing really well by them. But I had this moment where I'm on a plane, and I was reading in a book that said, obviously you're the product of the 5 people you're around the most. And professionally at that time, I jumped up and I was scared shitless, because I was like, oh wow, I don't like who I'm around professionally. This is a problem. And I won't name who those brands were. So, or people, it doesn't matter, they're lesser known. But and so I was worried, and I started praying to God. I'm like, all right, I need to make some changes. And within the next few days, they were all gone, just like that. And that rocked me, because I was like, wait, when I asked for change, I didn't mean like, like that fast. And then several months later, I had a very supportive wife, but unfortunately we had some other things that were going on. And so several months later, we ended up heading for divorce. And after an 8-year marriage. And at that point, that really rocked me. All of the things combined really rocked me. And I was like, all right, something's got to change. And it didn't matter that I was in this position where I thought I had done everything very well. It doesn't matter. I still was a common denominator. And so I was like, all right, I want to do things my way. And I remember I was coming home from Europe with my father, and mother. And we went there originally with my ex-wife to spend time with her family, and we came home early because of all these things. And what changed it was my father, God rest his soul, he was always like a mentor and a best friend. And we're sitting in this airport, I think it was in Vienna, and he's like, I love you. And I was like, oh shit. Like you're gonna give me, because like he was a loving man, but he wasn't like that. He doesn't talk like that, you know. And I was like, oh wow, you're gonna like you're gonna give me something deep here. And he's like, I think you're out of time in trying to do it other people's way. And I think that if you don't start doing it your way, I don't know when there's going to be a better time. I think you're out of time. And I think you just need to run your race for you and do it your way. And no matter how long it takes, just do it. And so that's what changed is I came home and I'm like, all right, you know what? There's conversations that are not being had about entrepreneurship. There's conversations that are not being had about mental health. There's conversations that are not being had about relationships. There's conversations that are not being had about success and what defines it. And a lot of what the media was giving at the time was very kind of like, here's the highlight reel. And nothing changed. It actually got bigger and bigger and bigger over time. I mean, this is 2014, right? So like, this is kind of, I mean, even before really the Kardashians were on like Instagram, but it would just kind of kept growing in that capacity. And I was like, no, I want to have some different conversations online. I want to talk about the realities of choosing your own path, of choosing yourself, and even during the times that look a little uglier. And so I started with one account online, not knowing what was going to happen, not sure that people wanted to talk about these things. And I was grossly wrong when, these accounts started blowing up and everyone's like, thank you, somebody's talking about these things. I was like, oh, okay, I hit some hot topics here. And the rest kind of just figured itself out along the way. It grew into something bigger. And then eventually more people wanted to know about me because I did it under a moniker. I started writing a lot more. Privately, I've been writing for about 25 years, publicly for only 10. And that was a very vulnerable thing for me to do. And I love writing about a multitude of things. And I found that more and more people were just like, how are you in my head? Like, how do you know what I'm thinking? How do you know what I feel? And I'm like, well, I'm you. Like I'm no different than you. We're all souls having an experience here. It's just that we're all in different seasons, but we're all here to, figure out what we're here to do and why we want to do what we do. And we're all having similar experiences, just different backgrounds, different circumstances. And the more I kept doing it, the more I started using some of the things that some of my skill sets for brands I started using for myself to grow my own initiatives. And here we are. So, but it was a very spiritual time back then. And I say spiritual because I didn't really know what to do either. Besides my father's advice, I went to a rabbi, and I remember I went to him and he's like, this is my parents' rabbi. And I was like, he's like, what's going on? I'm like, my soul hurts. And he's like, oh, your soul hurts? I was like, yeah, like something doesn't feel good internally. Like my soul hurts. He's like, okay. He's like, well, listen, this is about a relationship with yourself. And where are you? Who are you? What's your character? What are your needs? What are your values? Like, what's that relationship like with yourself? And when we start there and we start to unfold all these little pieces, you'll start to find, who you've been really all along. And so then he introduced me to several people in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I was living and where I'm living now, some other, spiritual advisors, if you will, who were very rabbinical, very like, they're great at asking questions that force you to think
Yes.
internally and ask yourself the tough questions. And that became like, I became my mission. I was like, I want to have a better, deeper relationship with myself. And that just changed everything. And then I just did it publicly in front of everybody. And only, as you evolve, so to do the things that you share publicly too. Right. So yeah, that's why I said it was very spiritual. It was like very internal. And I wanted to have I wanted to understand how I was showing up in all these positions. And a few people had said, wow, you're taking it so hard. Like, your wife was a part of it too. and or those businesses were part of it too. And I said, true, but I'm no longer responsible for them. And since I'm responsible for me, I got to find out how I ended up here. So
Yeah.
here we are.
What's been one of the most effective, profound questions that you've asked yourself that has like produced endless hours of self-discovery that you find
What do you,
super
yeah, what do you want? What do you want? Because if you ask most people what they want, the first thing they go is, it's like deer in headlights, you know? Or
I want it
the,
all.
yeah, I want it all. Or all the external things. Well, I want the house, the cars. It's like, no, you want the freedom. And then you're going to have to start to define what that looks like. So once I started asking myself, what do I want? Then I had to go on a path of self-discovery of what is there's an exercise out there, average perfect day, which I made this like clarity workshop that I wanted people to have, but it's like average perfect day. Like, what does your day look like? Like, have you really thought about your day? Or what do you want to do with your time? What does your time look like? How are you spending your time? Who are you spending your time with? What would you do with your time ideally? And as I started asking these important questions, at first, a lot of people, it scares a lot of people. And you and I have talked about this. When we first started asking these questions and we don't know the answers, I think that's why a lot of people avoid them, right? Because you a lot of times don't have answers right away. And so we have to start asking. And so I did this powerful exercise, average perfect day, which is like 23 specific questions. And it's very interesting to think about. So you have to feel it from your soul. Like, what does a day look like? And there's different questions about each part of the day. And then I had some mentors years ago. One in particular said, do you know what you're doing with your time? And obviously we all think we do because we're quote unquote busy. We all think we know what we're doing with our time. And he said, I want you to document for 7 days what you're doing every hour that you're awake. I want you to document it for 7 days. Now that took me 2.5 years to do. I was so resistant. And then when I did it, I was pissed. I realized how much time I was wasting, even though I seemingly was busy and I have all the open tabs up in the head. And because my father was about to pass, I started thinking about time differently. And so besides, what do you want? What do you want to do with your time? Came in, and I really started having a relationship with time differently.
Yeah.
And I think we don't think about time enough because it's finite, but we treat it like it's infinite. And we have to first audit ourselves, like, what are we doing with our time? Because then we can start to create our day differently around how we would like to live our life and what activities are we implementing into our time now that we know how we can optimize it.
Right.
So all these questions started kind of.
I love that. Have
Yeah.
you noticed that time distorts depending on the occasion, the intention, the
Yeah.
work that you do? And if so, what have you noticed and what can you kind of break down in regards to time? Because I've thought about this a lot too. And when I think about time, I also think about presence. And so I'm curious to see or hear what you have there.
Time and clarity. So yes, time distorts. We're not as if we're busy, are we productive and efficient? Are we intentional? And when you and I were discussing, when I read a book, Essentialism by Greg McKeown, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less, his whole thing was 90% of the things that we do that we're concerned about are unimportant. You have to find your 10%. And we can actually have higher output when we are clearer on what we are doing with our time and doing it in less time. So less time, higher output when we know what we're doing and why we're doing it. And this isn't just for work. This is for everything. I am a uber creative. I was not a disciplined, calendared, time-centric, focused individual. Anybody growing up with me knew I was the exact opposite I was so far opposite that I thought a calendar was restricting. I thought, no, that'll restrict my creativity. That'll restrict flexibility. I actually learned the exact opposite. No, the more understanding you have of your time, the more you actually have time. That was the interesting part. And so it reversed everything I ever thought about. And so I did this audit. And then what I started doing is I started thinking about, okay, well, how would I like to work in the day? When would I like to do my training and my health and my body? When would I like to cook? When would I like to spend time with friends and family? When would I like to do my extracurriculars and hike and and the art, or like whatever it might be? And so, interestingly enough, between that and Cal Newport's deep work, I started implementing sprints, 2-hour sprints, 3 times in the morning and 1 in the afternoon if I needed. But what started happening is, because I was disciplining, knowing, okay, this is what I'm dedicated in this 2-hour sprint. These are the tasks that help support that sprint to get done what needs to get done. I was now having more output in less time with my afternoons and evenings open. And suddenly I'm like, oh my God, I have like all this extra time. And then my nervous system didn't even know what to do with that, because it was like, you should be hustling. You should be doing more. Because my body wasn't used to like efficiency. Yeah. It was the weirdest thing. And I'm like, oh my God.
We're used to emptiness.
Yeah. Yeah.
The efficiency, right?
Yeah. We're used to busyness and emptiness, and all this like stuff, all this scrambling around, all this procrastination, all this. And it was so weird, because I'm like, wait a minute, I'm freer than I've ever been. I was like, oh my God, this is so ironic. This is completely opposite. And I was worried with my work, because I love writing and creating and doing content and all this other stuff. I now have anywhere upwards of like 120 to 150 pieces of content that go out a week, and I'm doing it in less time than I ever have before, because I started thinking about batching and using systems and automation and what was interesting is because of my dedication to penciling in that time, it's actually expanded, not contracted. Like, in fact, I can't even stop the create. It's like a muscle. You keep working it, even if you show up and you're not wanting to like be creative at that time. Well, no, you can spend the time doing something that inspires creativity. Yes. And so all of a sudden I noticed like, oh wow, it's a muscle, and it's actually expanding more and more that I couldn't even stop it if I wanted to. I'm like, oh my God, this is incredible. So, scheduling was the exact opposite of everything I thought. I was so resistant to it. And then now my relationship with time has completely changed my whole life.
I love that. 2 things came up for me when you were talking about that. One, have you heard of Parkinson's law?
No.
Okay, so Parkinson's law is basically they did this experiment that says they gave 2 groups the same task to do, but they gave them different time frames. So Group A had 4 hours to complete this task, and Group B had 8 hours to complete the same task. And at the end of the study, both groups finished in the allotted time. And so what it says is that time, whatever the activity will rise or shrink to the level of time that's allotted for the thing, right? And so that kind of speaks to what you're saying. I'm only giving myself 2 hours to get this thing done, brings a new level of intentionality into that moment, into the task. You think about it differently because there's now constraints. But with those constraints, it actually allows you to, in some ways, be more expansive, to be more effective within the time that you gave yourself. So that was one thing that I thought about. The other thing is, regarding time, there's past, present, future. And I find that really high achievers are really focused on the future more so than present or past, and people who aren't living the life that they want tend to focus more on past failures and things that they don't like, more so than the present and the future. And depending on which one you're focusing on, you can always recreate a past situation in the now, which then brings more of it into the future, or think about a painful future and bring it into the now, and that'll affect how you feel. But for anxious individuals like myself, and you alluded to that a little bit last time we talked, time, when you think about it in the future, or when you think about anything that's not happening right now in this moment, you compound time. Mm-hmm. And it's like this moment compounded with another moment makes time feel heavier, which actually speeds up the time. And so if you talk to any athlete or anyone who's ever done a significant thing or made a game-winning shot or did really well in a business pitch and they were in complete flow, they'll often tell you that time slowed down. I was able to see things in a different way. And it's actually not so much that time slowed down as much as you were just on time, one with time, not speeding it up. Right. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
So true. I got into all this to buy back my time.
Yeah.
And then I realized when I am in movement and I'm very present,
Yes.
the deep work isn't so much about getting the thing done as much as I am in a moment and everything slows down because I'm intentionally focused on something in particular and I'm in the action of it. And so the noise just goes away. All of the noise, all the external noise just goes away. I use an analogy that has been helpful to a few people. I'd say, like, let's say you were given a 101 Ferrari, but it's all in pieces. It's only one of one in the world that'll ever be, it all came straight from the factory and it was brought to you in a beautiful garage for you to work in. Right.
Right.
And when you first look at it, it's overwhelming because you're like, oh my God, like there's so much to do with that. I don't know what I'm doing. All this other stuff. True. But the moment you jump into the garage and you start putting some of the pieces together and you're given all the manuals, all of the like advisors, all of the, YouTube, whatever it might be, and you're putting it all together bit by bit by bit, you already know the outcome. You already know the outcome. You're going to have a one of one Ferrari. What starts to happen though is while you're in the moment building piece by piece, all the noise is gone. You're actually just figuring it out. You're very centered and you're very focused and you're like, oh, this goes in here. And why is this piece not working in? Or, oh, I see, I have to move this out first and then bring this other thing in. All the concerns, all of the thoughts, all of the external world, everything else that's going on is suddenly dormant. It's silent. And you're completely present in the moment, working on something very specific that doesn't have a future or a past. You know the outcome, which is the future, but you're not even concerned with it because all you are focused is on like this step in particular that you're working on. Yes. And without all that noise. And so it's like, if life is about working in the garage, that is your journey. Like that's like you're in the garage just constantly working on the next thing. I noticed that time slows down, but the output of what we're doing from that slowed down time is actually speeding up the results.
Yeah.
So it's such a fascinating thing because you're so presently into the thing right in front of you, without all the distractions, that its output far outweighs than like you've probably seen the diagrams online that I know some marketers have used and some neuroscientists have used. It's like it's a circle and it's got like 24 different arrows coming out of it versus another circle where it's just one arrow. And the problem with multitasking, right, as like, someone like Gary Keller would talk about in The One Thing, the multitasking is a myth. It's throwing us off. It's spreading us too thin among too many things. So, and even though we have more than one thing going on in our life, we have to learn how in each thing of our life, how to give it exactly 100% of our attention. And so, and then that's when we see a difference in our output. And somebody, by the way, a gal that I was coaching, she was like, I love your schedule. She's like, but what happens when you have, family? And I was like, I built the schedule to be flexible for a family. And she's like, huh. And I'm like, yeah, because I have systems in place. I built a foundation and infrastructure in time that because I have more things in the background that were in place to help, it allows for more flexibility because I know where things are at and how they're moving, whether I'm there or not. So I actually built a life around time, knowing that we have to always be flexible because everything in life is uncertain. Right. And, even recently I dealt with a passing of my uncle. And while I was away handling family affairs, like the systems I have in place for everything in my businesses were all operating while I was gone. So I'm like, this is a weird feeling. Like, should I be doing something? So
yeah, there's a quote that kind of goes with what you're saying. This is something my friend had told me. He's a triathlete, and I think the quote came from another triathlete. But he said, "Going slow is smooth,
smooth is fast,
and smooth is fast."
It's my favorite quote. It's one of my favorite quotes,
dude. It's so good. And like, at first you're like, "Yeah, but I got to go slow," but then you're like, "Yeah, but it'll be way better and smoother and therefore faster. So I love that. And then to the family piece, I know that you talk about, or you were mentioning your schedule's built in for that. I have found myself as a father, uh, because I'm more anxious, like we had talked about, like when I'm in a certain place, I'll want to be in another place, or I want to get to the other place without realizing that I'm in this place, which is why presence is so important to me, because I had to like remind myself. And there was like, this was probably like 6 months ago. I had a epiphany or a thought. I was like, we spend so much time trying to get here to there, and it's everything in the middle that is actually what life is. And life is the messy part. Life is here, the transition, and there. But if we spend so much focus and put so much energy on the outcome that only is so brief, we're missing everything else up until that point. And human nature is like, oh, I can't wait till I get that, because when I get that, then I'll feel better. This. It's like, if you're not feeling that now, that thing definitely won't give that to you. Even if you get it momentarily, it's going to fall apart because you're only going to want something else. And so finding or having a perspective of like, no matter how messy life is right now, or how challenged I might be, or what position I'm in, learning to find gratitude for, one, that you're alive, and two, you get to have whatever it is that is in your environment around you at this moment, is such a great starting point to build an abundance mindset, and also that calmness and that mindfulness that you and I think are talking about. What are your thoughts on that?
I love that you brought this up. When I referenced to you that I had done a clarity workshop, so what it's actually called is reverse engineer your life.
Mm.
And it was a 4-part series. And it's like a free workshop. I put it on because like my audience was like, this exact point. They're like, I'm scattered. Like I want to enjoy here, but aren't we supposed to think about the future? And if we have to make goals, then thinking in the future, I know I need to enjoy here. And so I did this 4-part series where I want to enjoy here as well too. And I found that I took some of my favorite authors in science and spirituality and brought all the concepts together. And what I thought about is it was the first thing is like, okay, like to the point of what I mentioned, I was like, first you got your average perfect day, which is like what does your life feel like on any given day? Like what does that actually look like according to these type of questions? And they're very like what do you call it? Like auditory, or like visual and sensory, and all the senses, right? And when you actually think through all these, like, what does your home smell like? What are you doing exactly when you wake up? Who are you having breakfast with, and where? It's very, what are you doing for a living? What are your businesses like? How are you operating them? It's, who are you having lunch with? They're very, very interesting, unique questions. And when you think about how you're operating a day and living your life, then the next part was, okay, like, so what are you currently doing with your time? So you can find how you're using it. Then the third part was Gary Keller did the 1-3-5, which was a one-page business plan, if you will, but you can use it for anything. And it was, what's one goal, 3 priorities to support that goal, and 5 tasks for each priority. And you can use it whether it's like for, your podcast or my health. And I'll give you an example. Like for my health, I knew that, okay, I want to get to 16% body fat. That's the next goal. I know that I'm at 19 and a half. And I know that there are 3 priorities that are going to support that are my weight training, my nutrition, and my active recovery. 3 priorities. And then I knew 5 tasks that support each of those priorities. Now, what's happening? Well, the goal no longer matters. The tasks are making me present because they support my priorities. My priorities support the goal. The goal is inevitable. Now I'm not living in the future. I'm actually executing the tasks, which I now put in my calendar, because I'm like, oh, this is what I'm doing. This is what my day looks like. Oh, weird. If I know what my average perfect day looks like, I know how I'm using my time, I know what tasks I'm clear on doing, and I've scheduled them in. I've now created a life presently focused even though it has the end in mind, or a future vision, if you will. And that was the whole basis of why I did that workshop, because I did it for myself, and I started noticing like the changes in my body, the changes in some of my business endeavors, and you can use the 135 for anything, you know. So I did these 4 templates. It was like, when we can reverse engineer, it's good to have you want a vision for yourself, but you want the flexibility of all the things that you don't know yet that are going to come. But you also want to be doing tasks presently that are future pacing, right? And because, like, for example, it's like when you do something, is this how future Matt would handle this situation? You know, so sometimes I think about it like that. It's like, well, should I be concerned about this?
Mm-hmm.
No, future Matt wouldn't be concerned about that. Future Matt would probably be doing this. Oh, okay, then let me just do that now.
Yeah.
And I think we're so concerned sometimes about the end result. And that 135 really changed me, because it was like, and that mixed with Andrew Huberman when he was talking about, you know, as we spoke about, don't chase the goal, chase the task, because then you're creating dopamine every single day from completing the tasks. And I started noticing, from the consistency of doing the tasks that support my priorities, that support the goal, I started surpassing my goals like it was nothing. But I wasn't addicted to the goal. That I hit the goal, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll just keep
Yeah. It just
going.
became part of your identity because of the things that you were
Yes.
doing daily, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like, how much of your day is consisting of things that you, let's say, on a spectrum of like love versus hate, maybe, but like I just really don't like this, don't want to do this. How many how much of your tasks are on the side that I love this, or it a lot, it makes me feel alive, like it gives me energy.
um I'd say probably 70 to 80% are probably love.
Yeah.
The 20%, but are still needed, are sometimes there's, you know, mundane details in there. Like, look, when you're optimizing your systems, and when I say systems, I don't just mean business. I mean like what's working for your nutrition, and what's working for your weight training, or what's working for um your spouse or your partner, or whatever, all these things. Um Although I think it's fun for a spouse or partner, but for the most part, like when you're optimizing certain systems, sometimes you know, you're spending time figuring out like, okay, well, what's not working there, you know, what can I do better, or, you know, what might be. Um but I mean, I don't know. The more I think I get it now, because I'm less tied to the goal and more tied to the action. So I think it's mostly just in the business side, where it's all those little like mundane things that you don't foresee coming, right? Like all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, I have to take care of this stuff for the taxes. I have to take care of this stuff because, you know, the company is registered as an S corp, and so you have to file these extra papers, or the bank now wants these things, so I have to do these things, and that's not normally part of my routines. It's like, you know, these little mundane things that come in that are very task ticky tack, but like you require your attention, you know. But you're like running your Olympic run, and you you don't want to necessarily divert your attention. But that's where flexibility has to come in, and I think it also teaches us how to be more flexible and flow. I learned flow comes from not so much everything always being in alignment, but how do we handle when things are out of your alignment, that we can still consistently show up all the way through it, you know, with the same kind of um, mindset, with the same kind of, you know, understanding, and not be so thrown off from everything that doesn't, you know, align with your average perfect day, right?
Right, right. Yeah, flow is there's like I always like don't know how to pronounce his name. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, I think is like how you say it. That's the author of the book Flow. 9 characteristics that get you into that state of mind. One of them that can get you there is just an awareness of this moment,
Yeah.
both pain ridden and pleasure ridden, but an awareness nonetheless. And I think that's just a really simple takeaway that anyone can walk away from this episode and utilize. It's like, am I aware of right now? Even though right now isn't where I want to be, the awareness of me being here allows me to extract information from this situation that
Yes.
either could help me avoid it again in the future, handle it better in the future, or turn it around and make it something that it wasn't before, but because I'm paying attention, I know what to do. So many times I think we're just on autopilot, just coasting because it takes a lot of energy to be present. It does, but what's the opposite? Or what if we're not, what do we how are we going to live our life? It's going to be by default. And as long as we're living by default, other people are going to call the shots. We're not going to be happy with the things that are given to us. We're going to live more so out of fear than anything else, and we're going to be reactive. And in my opinion, that's not a good combination. That is not going to lead to a fulfilling life, whatever you deem that as. And so, yeah, a presence and awareness of right now is a critical factor of experiencing what life is.
A life, I say a life by design, not by default, right? And you're 100% right. It's we're going to exert energy no matter what. So if we're either going to exert energy through avoidance, or we're going to exert energy through personal accountability. And the simplistic way is exactly what you said. It's just like stopping in any given moment, like, stop. What do I want? What do I need? What's going on here? Just what's going on here. You don't even have to make sense of it all. Just what is happening right here. Okay. Am I cool with this? Yes, great. Am I not cool with this? Okay. If I'm not cool with this, why? And if I know why, what would be an alternative way of doing whatever's happening right here, or to solve what is happening in this moment? And like anything, like any muscle, you do that enough times, you'll naturally just start to solve things. Your energy will work for you in any given moment, and it won't feel like the same work when you first try anything. It's a lot of work, right? It feels like a lot. But after a while of doing certain things, just like all the things I learned from all the scheduling, I never, at first it was like, oh my God, this is so much work. And then after a while you realize, oh my God, this is easy. It's just that it's just brand new. Just like when you first get to the gym, you're like, oh my God, lifting this weight is crazy. This is really hard. And after a while you're like, oh wow, like I trumped that weight. I'm way past that now. So everything is hard in the beginning, but not in repetition.
Yeah.
Right.
Have you noticed with your shifting around of the 1-3-5 thing, right?
Yeah.
On the 3 and the 5. Have you noticed that the more you focused on that, the less you became focused on maybe short-term gratification, and it correlated more to long-term thinking? Did you notice that, or has that been a byproduct, or is that not even correlated at all?
I already had a pretty decent relationship with getting rid of short-term gratification, but it definitely got me deeper into short-term tracking for long-term vision. When we think about our goals and we think about the things that we want, it's easy to think about the goal, but have you ever actually thought about what's all involved with it? And I think what the 1-3-5 did for me was it had me go to the layers under the goal to understand like what that looks like what is actually needed.
Yeah.
And then when you look at priorities, you go, okay, like how do I, like what all would be involved in these these different buckets that I can try, and then I can also I can measure it. Like I'm doing something specific that I can at least look at and say, is this working? Because what happens is you can do 5 tasks for one priority, and 4 of them are working really great. And one of them is like, you know what, this doesn't really seem to be working as much. Do I double down on one of the other ones, or do I remove this one and add a new one? Like it allows you to kind of test and iterate more short term, so you get less about the short term gratification. More the gratification now in the short term becomes more of optimization, less about like the reward, because progress. So I think that's ultimately what it really did for me was, and it's funny because on a couple of things. Like I had one for like my new podcast, The Niche Is You. I launched that just 5 months ago, and that thing is cranking. And I actually use the 135, and of course some new things that I've done that I learned from growth marketing in general. And it's been interesting. I did the 135 for that, and I see exactly where. So I am actually hitting all the numbers that I wanted for the year, because it's this first year. But there's a couple things on those task lists that I have not been doing. And I'm like, oh, wow, I need to start implementing those. That's going to make the difference. And I can see it. Like it's cool to know. Or there's other buckets where I knew like, oh, wow, I did all that. That thing isn't really needed. So it allows us, I think, to really be a part more of the process and know like what are all the tasks that are involved, and really, again, be in that garage building the car. But by doing all the things that are on that 135, yeah, I'm gonna hit that number. And and it was less guessing. Like a goal, you don't want the goal to be guessing. You want the goal to be like movement, right? And experimentation, and doing a set of different things that all are supporting each other. And then if something isn't supporting itself, it's supporting the bigger picture, then at least you can track what that is. And that becomes a lot more fun, because you feel there's it's freer. It doesn't feel so overarching, like up here, like this mythical goal, because you're actually like putting all the pieces together to the engine.
Yeah. The niche is you. I love that line. I love that concept. I love the philosophy, the thought behind it. When you look out at the brands that you've worked with, the people that you've interviewed, the individuals that you observe in your interactions wherever you go, if you were to say like maybe 1 to 2 bad habits that people have that either disrupt their time or confuse them to the point where they don't know who they are and they just fall off the path, whatever that path is for them, and then maybe 1 or 2 things that you think should be instituted, and maybe they both go hand in hand, what would you say?
The 2 bad habits are boxing yourself in and comparing yourself to everybody else. Because no 2 paths are ever going to be the same, ever. None of us are supposed to have the exact same path. We may run parallel and a shared vision.
Right.
That's business partners, spouses, but no 2 paths are the same. So we can't box ourselves in, and we can't compare to everybody else that this is what I have to live up to, or this is what I should be, or this is how it should look.
So real quick on comparison, because I have my a unique perspective on this, but I think comparison is a human like thing. It's how we understand the world around us, right? What's the spectrum of comparison that you have in your mind? Like, is there a way that it could be used both negatively and positively? If so, how do you view that? And maybe for someone who's listening who is struggling with comparison, and as a byproduct of that, boxing themselves in or just not living a fulfilled life, how can they either reframe how they're currently comparing or drop it altogether?
I agree with you. I think there's a lot of components to it, and I can give you both a positive and a negative.
Yeah.
Will I compare myself to Kobe Bryant's work ethic all day long? I love his work ethic. I loved his work ethic. He loved what I'm not a basketball player. Well, actually, I actually am a decent basketball player, but I'm not trying to compete in basketball. It was his love of what he was doing, and I loved he loved showing up at 3 a.m. for practice. He loved the practice. He loved to practice, and he loved learning his craft, and he loved learning the mastery. He loved learning, optimizing his performance, like everything about basketball. He just loved what he did, and he respected what he loved, and he showed up to show the respect that he loved it. So that I will compare myself to him, but like, am I showing up for the thing that I love a level that like that? Yeah. Beautiful comparison. I think that's just me. Some people might think
I read
right.
That. Yeah.
Right. So that for sure. Like, so there are people we can admire because we look at and go, wow, that is dedication, that's respect, that's love, that's trust, that's faith, that's moving in the direction of something you believe in, that's trusting yourself and, going against the grain, all that stuff. Then there's the comparison of, um, do I have to be how all the external things, right? Like, oh, that person is also in the same industry or maybe not, whatever. And that's what success looks like. I should have those things. I should be charging this. I should be making that. I should be, doing it this way because that's what all the other people have always done. Like the worst thing I used to hear from companies I used to consult with is like, this is the way it's always been done. I'm like, and then you wouldn't have needed me if it was working. And so like saying that this is the way it's always been done, therefore this is how I should always want it, like all of you, we then can start chasing after something that was never even meant for us in the first place, nor to even show up that way. And maybe we're the ultimate blue ocean. Maybe our personality, our soul was ultimately supposed to bring in a whole new dimension to that very same industry. That's innovation. Like your soul is needed. That's why I said it doesn't matter how saturated the market is. If you're called to it, like you're called to it. Like God's got you. Like it doesn't matter how saturated the market is. If that's for you, it's for you. Your personality, your soul is going to do it all differently than it's been done by everybody else, and they should be all doing it differently than everybody else. And so when we start to compare ourselves to somebody else, oh, like I want a podcast like that person. Like, no, I need you to podcast like you, because if you try to be like somebody else, like you can't take somebody else's soul, you can't take somebody else's secret sauce and make it yours. You are your own secret sauce. Like, so you have to be very, very careful about comparison and trying to show up like how somebody else is when you already came in with all these unique talents and gifts and like flavor and personality and style and uniqueness and that was really also one of the fundamental principles of the niche is you, is like, stop trying to fit in, like, because you're limiting from trying to fit in. The irony of you trying to chase all these things and compare yourself and be a part of all these things and say, oh, this is specifically what I do, you're narrowing how vast you are. The niche is you is more of like, no, you're more than one thing. I'm not saying like spread yourself too thin. I'm just saying you're more than one thing. You're not limited to a title or a job or this specific thing, and that creates your whole identity. I'm saying you're multiple things, and you're going to, hopefully bring all of that uniqueness, in the process. And it's the relationship you have with yourself that allows you for that. So I think there's a positive and negative with comparison for sure.
So I hear in that, like with the Kobe Bryant example, you're comparing against a characteristic.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Whereas another comparison is like to something, an innate,
a metric,
something to them, to that person, or to a metric that may or may not be aligned with you, the way that if you just thought about what's important to you and then did that, that would be way more effective. So that's what I heard from that. And I just wanted to check in and say that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then dang, I had this thought that I was going to ask you. Hold on. It was with the comparison. Oh, I think a framework that kind of fits into that is something that I learned from a UNLV professor who studies comparison. And there's you can compare up, you can compare laterally, and then you can compare down. And I think most people compare up, and they compare themselves to things that either don't align, that they'll never be because it's not them, or they use it as a way to make themselves feel less than. So within the up, comparing up, there's a couple ways that you can view that. One is you're comparing up to Kobe Bryant because Kobe Bryant's work ethic is like ridiculously insane and like an ideal for hard work. So you're comparing yourself up to that. But this is something my wife taught me. She goes, if you spot it, you got it. If you spot the hard work that Kobe Bryant does, part of you loves the hard work too, and there's an affinity there. And so you're using the positive in the up comparison to leverage yourself into doing more of that thing, as opposed to comparing yourself up in a way that makes you feel less than, and then you actually shrink. Not good, right? Then you compare laterally to people who are kind of like in your age, in your own demographic, and you can kind of say, okay, we're on the same path, we're doing similar things, and you could either congratulate that or again use that as a differentiation. But then there's comparing down, where you're either comparing yourself to who you used to be, which is cool because then you can recognize the growth, or you compare yourself to other people who aren't as far as you to give you context just how far you've come. And so I thought when I learned that like 4 or 5 years ago, I thought that was really helpful to like give dimension to how we compare to other things.
It's true. For me, comparison can get very tricky because we can start to overthink.
Yeah.
And the thing I want most is to get as centered as possible. And I don't want to overthink myself out of movement. Um, I we have to, I mean, obviously we have to be aware of what's going on in the outside world. I mean, it's, we're living here. We have to. And we have to allow some information in that allows us to in some way add to our experience, and that we can learn from, like a Kobe Bryant, like, oh, I like that he is showing up to something he loves. That's the takeaway. And it's comparing up, and it's like, because he's shown what happens when you repeat the work ethic towards something you love. Here's the result. Great. What he owns, how he's living, what, God rest his soul, all the things that made up his world, not comparing to. To me, that doesn't matter. I don't want to, that's for me to decide. Mm-hmm. Now, when we, I have found that if we're not careful, if we start to look at too many people, okay, I'll give you a great example. So most people don't know this, but when I first got into digital and I was first graduating college, I went into the music industry, working at Virgin Records in California and LA. And as quickly as I got in, as I got out. But I remember talking to an artist at the time, and a new album came out that was like from a very popular artist at the time. And I was like, oh my God, did you hear so-and-so's new album came out? And I'm going on this whole tear about this artist. I'm 21 years old. And this artist said to me, no, Matt, I haven't. I'm like, how could you have not heard that album? And the artist said to me, he's like, Matt, the thing is I'll get to it eventually, but right now I'm creating my second album and I'm in creation mode, and I don't want, I want to make sure that my soul comes through what I'm creating and it comes all from me. He's like, I definitely have like a lot of influences. I grew up with a lot of influences, a lot of this stuff, but right now I'm not listening to anybody or anything else. I'm in complete like blinders on in my path. I'm wanting to make sure that what I create doesn't sound like anybody else, and that my soul comes through it. And I love learning that lesson from such an early age, because it was so cool to hear, like, yeah, he'll get to it and he'll acknowledge it and he'll enjoy it. But first and foremost, in this moment, I have to have, the blinders on, so I don't try to bring in other influences to make something that needs to be uniquely from me, with their take. Like, and sometimes I think that we have to be very careful when we compare and we look at a lot of other stuff. Is that how I should be doing it? And that's working for them. Should I be doing it that way? And, so, but again, there's this like unique balance, because if we're talking about like a business practice, or like a, or a practice within our health or whatever, well, we want that information to come through because it is working for other people, right? So it's like this very delicate balance of, we don't want to compare. I think we don't want to compare lives, but maybe we can compare practices that, that can help. And I think that then we're, and, you also get a lot of people who compare, especially when they're in the same fields. And I say, listen, and this goes back to the whole imposter syndrome thing, right? Which is, there was a gal that I coached years ago when I was helping with her brand. She was a yoga instructor. She had like 400 hours of the training that they have. And she's like, only 3 years in. And she's like, who am I? And I'm like, what do you mean, who are you? And she's like, well, I mean, there's people with thousands of hours. And I'm like, are you training them? And she's like, no. And I'm like, who are you training? She's like, well, people like you. I'm like, do I train? Like, do I get certified? She's like, no. And I'm like, the people you serve are coming to you regardless. You're the one with the training. You're just teaching them yoga. And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, you have imposter syndrome because you're comparing to the people with thousands of hours, but you don't even serve them. You serve the general public who's just coming to you because you're constantly learning and getting certified. And the more you do it, you're just serving us. Pay attention to the people you serve.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, I was like, if we just pay attention to who we're serving and why we're serving and move in that direction, you become a lot less concerned with what everybody else in your own industry is doing. Unless, of course, you're excited by how they're innovating. But for the most part, you want to just keep serving the people and allow that to grow as a community and understanding uniquely who they are and their needs and how you're continuously bringing more and more value. I was like, then you become less concerned with everybody else in comparison and more concerned with how you continuously grow the community that you're bringing value to. And suddenly
Yes.
everything just right, like, become blinders on. So when
Yeah.
people say, oh, did you see what that person did and that person? I'm like, oh, I had no idea. No, I'm like, I'm focused on these people that I'm helping right now. The community's growing, like, and they need more things to solve. So we're figuring it out. And then your life becomes more mission centric, right?
Yes. Yes. What do you, how does someone differentiate between whether to listen to the outside world or in some ways, like for inspiration or for just to spark something, and then tuning in to feel like what's right for you? What's your process of that? And like, what are some tacticals that people can learn to differentiate, maybe intuition versus that self-sabotaging thought in their head? Like, oh, well, I want to do that, but it's not realistic. No one's ever done it before. Meanwhile, there's like a voice underneath that's like saying, do it. Like, which one do I listen to? How do I know which one's accurate? You know,
Right.
how do you work through that?
Well, from the external world, I'll say this. And then I'll address the intuition versus fear. For me, and with the external world, the greatest mentors and advisors I have around me make me think. They don't necessarily give me answers. They make me think. And so because they're experienced enough to know not to give answers because they already know every person's path is unique, but they make you think so you can identify and connect with what's going on, right? It's the people who give you like, this is exactly how you should do it. Like, really? Is that the only way? So in the external world, the advisors and mentors and people I trust the most, even like rabbis, the rabbis are notorious for that. They answer a question with a question. You're like, and it's always like it totally makes you think yourself like, okay, let me think about that for me. They make you go inside.
Yes. That
And I
makes you
love
work. Yeah.
the greatest, yeah, they make you go within. And those are the greatest external inputs that make you think about for yourself, right? On the inside, we're always battling intuition and fear. And it's funny because somebody on Instagram, I was doing a live and they asked me, they're like, I don't know if it's intuition or if it's fear. And I'm like, okay. I was like, intuition, I know what I know, like that. And most of the time, it's not necessarily the thing that I want to do at that moment, but I know, like I'll hear God, like I'll ask myself, I'll ask my soul, and it's like also asking God, and I'll hear it very distinctly. Do not date that person. Do not do that deal. Do not do that, and or sometimes do it. It's not always the not, but like more often than not, though, however, a lot of times that soul knows what you need. Your intuition knows. Feelings and emotions can make you go the other way. And so the kid asked, he goes, I'm assuming he's a kid, and he was 20-some-year-old, and he said, like a 22-year-old, he said, okay, well, how do you know if it's fear? I'm like, when I'm negotiating with God, I'm negotiating with myself. He's like, oh, and I'm like, I know what I know, what I know. It was instant. I knew it. But now I come in and I'm like, well, however, if I want to do this, this is what could happen.
Mm.
And I did ask for this technically because remember, I needed a deal. I needed, because I wanted to put a down payment on this and get the equipment for that. It's like we make all these, but my intuition knew it right away. Like, I wouldn't do this business deal. No, no. I knew it right away. So yeah, this kid asked me, he's like, how the hell do you practice something like that? And I said, I actually have figured it out. And I was like, here's what I do. I first, obviously asked my soul when it happened, and if it was a no right away, okay, but I'm not ready to accept it yet. No problem. Take one step in the opposite direction while being very self-aware and present. So you have a responsibility. Be like, you know what? I'm thinking this way instead. I'm going to try this. Do it. Take one step, but be very self-aware. How is it feeling? Are you liking the relationship that's kind of building in this business deal, or with this person that you kind of felt like maybe you shouldn't have dated, or whatever? Like, how does it feel? I think there's not enough. It still feels kind of good, or masked, or whatever it is. Let me take another step. We'll take another step. Now, in each step, just keep asking yourself, does this feel right? Now, the good news is even if you go really far off path, which happens to a lot of people, the moment you choose to take one turn back right, you're like, and listen to your soul like that, you're back to where you started. That's why they say God's always one step back to the right. He's like, God's always right there. Your soul's always right there. You can go so far off path, but the moment you decide to go back towards what you remembered like being your truth, but you knew what you instinctively knew, the moment you make that decision, it's one turn to the right. So that's comforting to people who
That is.
really, really derail. Like, man, that was a year of my time. You're like, the
Yeah.
cool thing is, do you get it now that you did trust yourself back at the beginning, but you just didn't trust yourself enough to, to go that route? Like, oh my God, you're right. I'm like, yeah, but at least the moment you made that right turn, you were right back to where you knew you had to be. So you're never far from yourself,
Right.
even if you have to experiment. And I said to the kid, I'm like, when you do that enough times, you start to practice trusting yourself, trusting your instincts. And so sometimes when your instincts immediately say no, do the no, see what happens. And we see this all the time. You do the no, and then something better comes along, right? You say no to this business deal, and all of a sudden you had the space to receive the bigger blessing that was trying to get in.
Yeah.
And I recently did a podcast on this, and it's related but unrelated. But there was this book I was reading called What the Angel Taught You. And it was written by this rabbi, and he was explaining about this old man is in a place of worship, and he sees a child, this little girl, like 6, 7 year old. She's praying, and this is kind of by two parts. I'm going to give you this first story and the second story. The first story, he goes up to the little girl and he says, like, everybody's left. Like, you've been praying for 6 minutes. Can I, like, and she's like, oh, I'm so sorry you saw that. She's a startled girl. And he goes, no, that's no problem. Can I ask, what you prayed for? And she goes, well, yes, my birthday's coming up next week, and I prayed for a bicycle. And the old man laughs and he goes, oh, okay, that's adorable, and leaves. 2 weeks later, back at the same place of worship, he sees the girl. He says, oh, you remember me? And she goes, yes, I do. He said, it was your birthday last week. Did your wish come true? And she says, yes, it did. And he says, oh, how are you enjoying your new bicycle? And she said, what do you mean? He said, well, you wished for a new bicycle. And she said, yes, I did. And he said, well, did you get it? And she said, no. God answers your prayer, whether it's a yes or a no. And the problem is that a lot of times we think a yes, that are what we're wanting, what we need, what our soul knows what we need. And we think that that our prayers are answered when it's an affirmative yes, but a lot of times it's answered when it's an affirmative no. And we don't give enough like allegiance, enough credit to the no's that are like, no, 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 no. Your bigger bicycle, your bigger thing, your better thing for you is right over here. Trust me. Just trust me. Trust me. But we have to trust ourselves. We have to trust our soul. We have to trust that guidance. And that's practice. That's a lot of practice, because like we have instant gratification needs all the time. I want this now. I was looking for this. I was needing this amount of money. I'm lonely. This is like this person, fits the bill. This is like, we can talk ourselves into anything. And, but our soul knows, our gut instincts know, and we have to learn to trust that gut instinct, even when it's brutal, because you're like, am I really going to say no? And Brandon Collinsworth, Brandon and I talked about this very specifically. He went on a mission of self-love, and he said the moment he started behaving that way, he said that, like, women that he would have previously wanted to date, all of a sudden found him and he was like, I can't. It doesn't feel right. I'm on a mission with myself and relying on that path, right? Excuse me. So trusting what we need and trusting our soul and trusting our path is a practice. You've got to be in that game every single day. And yes, you are definitely going to make mistakes. And yes, lots of grace. But it's cool to always know that I can always make one right turn and I'm right back to myself.
I do like that. I like the negotiating part because there's definitely been a lot of decisions that I've felt an instinct, and I'm like, but that's gonna take a long time. That's
Right, right.
to get so and so involved. Really don't want to talk to that person, and so it's like, but that initial spark was real, and it was like a whole body yes. Um, and then there's been times where I've gotten that and I followed it, and it's been organic and it just flows, and it was just like, wow, that was like a distinct memory. And so I think some key components there are one, creating time to reflect, creating time and to analyze what those impulses are, instincts are, and tracking those somehow, whether that's in a notepad or a freaking note app
Yeah.
or a voice note that you create for yourself, but something like this is your life that you're measuring. And if you can get closer to finding a way that you can communicate yourself that feels aligned and allows you to be more of who you are in all of your interactions, isn't that worth it? Like, right?
100%. 100%. In that same book, it asked about, is prayer for you or for God? And most people want to say God. And by the way, when I talk about God, like it's much more from a spiritual, like we're not separated. I know there's a lot of religions out there. I don't want to talk from a religion standpoint, but anyways, this author says, is prayer for you or for God? And most people want to say God. And the answer is you. Why? So he says that prayer is for you because when we go in, when we meditate, we reconnect to ourself. When we sit with self, whether we journal or we write or we have time with our soul or we reflect, we are reconnecting, we are recommitting to ourself. God knows what you want. You don't have to plead to God, and you don't have to say, oh, I need this universe and God and creator, and I need like everything you want and need is already understood. We're here to receive. So when you can connect to yourself and you can feel like and reflect, you can then receive. You can then, hear what is needed, how to move next, what to do. Like we actually would struggle a lot less when we have that reflection, when we connect to ourselves, when we like return, like God knows what you need. Of course he knows what you need. Like, do you know what you need? Can you receive answers? Can you receive help? Can you receive abundance? Can you receive guidance? Can you reconnect to yourself and commit to yourself, recommit every day, whether morning or afternoon? And it doesn't have to be like lengthy amounts of time if people don't have that. I get it. A lot of people are like, I don't have hours. Like, okay, 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the evening. How did I do today? What can I do better? What do I need? How am I feeling? What am I missing?
Yeah.
What's going on? And the more you practice that, you'd be amazed at how quickly answers just come to you. So like simplistically, you're like, it can't be that simple. And it is so simple. So often that I always say God, like we make plans and God laughs, but like I can feel God's smile because it's never how sometimes religions, I think, make it out to be like, he's going to test you and it's all for struggle. And it's like, no, like God smiles. Like I'll have conversations with myself. And I remember one time I was so upset and I was yelling at God. And 20 minutes later, I'm like, I'm sorry for yelling. And I could feel God like, that's okay. And I'm like, oh my God, that's forgiveness. I was like, so simple. It's so simple, right? Because like, didn't wane, didn't judge, didn't like think anything differently of me, never left. It's always like, I got you. You cool? And I was thinking, I'm like, that was on me. I was like, that's how you don't take things personally from other people. I'm yelling at this entity of God, and here I'm all like, and then all I could feel back was like, that's okay. So when people come at us, you know, it's like, that's okay. Like, as long as we're good with ourselves,
Yeah.
when we're good with ourselves, we're not taking it personally. That was one of the biggest lessons I've learned over the last 4 years. Oof, how to learn to not take things personally from other people. That was a lot of practice for me. Everybody's different. For me, it was a big one.
Yeah.
And once they stopped, the greater relationship I had with myself, the less I was taking it personally from other people. And then it separated me from them so I could also, communicate better
Yeah.
and not downplay me or come out of my own character,
Right.
and decision making, and it's how I could stay in flow from what works for me while still handling somebody else.
Yeah. So before I ask my last question, where's the best place that everyone can find you if they want to dive deeper and hear more?
Yeah, a few places at Matt Gottesman on Instagram. I try to do a lot of stories and posts there. The Niche Is You podcast
Mhm.
on Apple, Spotify, all like 30 whatever platforms there are, also sold separately, which they will hear your episode soon on. And mattgottesman.com will get them to everything else.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
One simple exercise or strategy that someone can do walking away from this episode, having talked about time, being intentional, not comparing or comparing intelligently and intentionally, um, not boxing yourself in, right? All the things that we've talked about. If they were to walk away and do one thing right now that would lead to greater levels of connection, clarity, and help them improve the quality of their lives, what would you say? Place to start.
I'll give you 5 journal prompts.
Okay.
The first journal prompt is, and you do this in the morning: thoughts, feelings, and emotions. Freehand journal, whatever you're thinking, just out loud, like how you're feeling, whatever
For
you're feeling, good, bad, everything.
3 minutes.
Yep. Just be a couple paragraphs, 2-3 minutes. Second journal prompt: 3 things you would like to achieve today. The third is, what are you grateful for? The fourth is something fun or adventurous for yourself today. And fun or adventurous, fun could be even like, oh, I want to paint, I want to run, I want to whatever it might be. And the fifth is, who can I pray for or serve today? Those 5 journal prompts really were game changers for me. And it allows you to freehand out your thoughts and your feelings. It allows you to think about what you would like to do today. It allows you to acknowledge what you're grateful for. It allows you to make sure that you make time for something that's to bring joy. And it allows you to think of others and how you're showing up in the world. And I think when you do those 5 journal prompts for a good amount of days, the clarity is like,
Dang.
yeah, and then if they go to my website on the mattgottesman.com, they'll find it. Like there's a thing there for the whole, that clarity exercise that I was talking about. If they need anything like that, that's, that was really helpful for me. But I think the 5 journal prompts, those, they'll set you straight.
Beautiful. Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate your heart, your mind, your spirit, your soul, your impact. Thank you for being on the show today and sharing your wisdom, brother.
Thank you for having me and allowing me to go on several tears. I appreciate you and your audience. Thank you.
Much love, everybody. Go out there, be your own 1%.